Hello, YouTubers. I'm not an expert, and today we're going to do a head-to-head comparison between a modern Chinese wooden hand plane, a Rabet plane, and an antique Rabet plane that's similar but not the same. And we'll take a look and see what's different about them. Let's start with the contender, the modern one. It's made of Chinese hardwood. It's got pretty standard. You can see if you compare them, they're similar in size. The antique's a lot taller. Both have a wedge holding the blade. If we look at it from this angle, you can see that there's a little more artwork to the hole here than there is the Chinese one's basically just cut straight through and has a bit more space left. Now, from what I understand, this hole is designed to help eject the shavings. I just did a test with it, and it doesn't really eject the shavings all that well. This hole, being cut straight through, isn't really going to do anything special to eject the shavings, and actually, it fills up quite well. I was doing some testing earlier, and it just packs the shavings in. So every 2 or 3 strokes, you're going to have to poke the shavings out. Depending, maybe your setup will be a little different, but that's the case. So what else is really different about this? Okay, so this has about an inch wide base, and it's just plain wood. All right. The antique, okay, so this isn't a regular everyday Rabet plane. The antique has a brass plate screwed on, actually 2 brass plates because they're separated, which even has, so you can see that. Can you see it on the end? 90-degree angle to it. So that would have been done to make these last longer, because wooden planes do wear out. As you're, wood against wood, but it will eventually wear the sole plate down, and you could plane that with another plane to flatten it. But clearly somebody at some company decided, let's put a piece of brass on there, and we'll build a plane that lasts longer. And what I like about this is you can see all of these screws, lots of screws. Right, of course, back then there probably wasn't any good way to hook a piece of brass onto a piece of wood except with screws, and they put a lot of screws here so the brass won't wrinkle or warp or buckle as you're rubbing on it. I just think that's kind of neat. It's certainly different than anything else I've ever seen. And most of these that you're going to find are not going to have that. Usually they're just wood. The other big difference between these two is that this blade is just square, and this is a skewed blade. Okay, so the skewed blade effectively gives you a lower angle and should make it easier to cut. Another noticeable difference is the blade on the antique one is a bit thicker. It's a little more than 1/8, and this one's about 1/10 of an inch. Not serious difference, but it's a difference. Let's get the wedge out of here. Hang on, I'll be right back. Okay, I got the wedge out. Let's take a look at the wedge. Let me get the wedge out of this one, if I can. Okay, let's compare the wedges. Obviously, a huge difference in size, but also a difference in the tip. This one's just sort of beveled off, no big deal. This one has quite a bit of art to it. And again, that's supposed to take the shavings and help push them out the hole. In my testing, which I'll show you in a minute, didn't really work that way. But might be me more than the plane. So those are the differences in the wedges. Basically the same thing, just different size. Let's look at the irons. Okay. Pretty similar idea, but you can see that the one from the antique is skewed. It is a bit thicker, but otherwise very similar. Right. Now, when I went to sharpen these, this had not been sharpened for a very long time, and this one had never been really sharpened. So I flattened the back, and you can actually see, I don't know if you can see it. Let me get this up close. You can see where it was done on a grinder. So there's a little bit of a dimple here from where the grinder originally cut it. And it was actually fairly sharp out of the box, usable for kind of crude work. So I sharpened that up, and I sharpened up this one also. Neither one was particularly hard. They both were very easy to get flat. The back of the Chinese one was close to being flat. It only had a little bit of unevenness, and so it polished out really quickly. Basically the same thing with the antique one. It was pretty flat, not perfect. And it's kind of hard to tell, but I think the antique one was actually a little softer and actually cut faster. I also had a little trouble even just getting a burr on it. Part of that's because the skew angle didn't fit my jig right, and I had to kind of mess with it. So, but also sometimes if a steel's soft, it can be hard to raise a burr. So it may not be the best steel, but it did cut pretty good. Matter of fact, it cut better than the Chinese one. It cut better, and I think most of that is because the thicker blade, and that when this one's in here, let me assemble this real quick. It's in here, and with the wedge in, the blade really doesn't have enough support. Even though there's wood behind it, there's nothing on top of it. And so I feel like when I was doing pine, it really made kind of a rough cut. Strangely enough, in oak, it was better. I wouldn't expect that. That's the way it worked out. So, those are kind of the main differences. I still think this is a good value. It's got real potential. It needs maybe a little shaping. This is a little sharp at the back, not super comfortable, but it actually does work. And I think with a little, maybe with a new wedge to get more support down here to hold the blade a little more firmly, I think I might cut pretty good. So that may have to be a project. Maybe in a few videos ahead, I'll make a new wedge for it and see if I can make that work. See if I can make that possible. Worst comes to worst, I can just cram a piece of wood in here to hold it down. Because I don't know if I showed this very well when I was doing the sample cuts, but this really does just pack up with the chips, with the curls. I also, and this I think is me more than that, I had a lot of trouble with both planes getting a really fine cut. And so I ended up with curls that were actually quite robust. Which, if you're making, I don't know if you can see, can you tell how thick that is? It's a pretty healthy curl. And that's how both of them, I just couldn't get it adjusted better. And I think that's me more than anything. And of course, if you're going to be making rabbets, you probably don't want a super fine cut. You really want to remove some wood because normally no one's going to see the rabbet. Although, well, sometimes if you're, you might actually need to see that. So anyway, let me jump cut here to some cutting. I did some cutting samples on some pine, some African mahogany, and a little bit of oak. And I'll show you those, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, this first test is going to be the Chinese plane on some pine. I have my fence set up. It's widening. It's a 1/4 inch or so at the base. Okay, a little hard to do without my hands blocking. Give you an idea of the shaving. That's actually pretty thick. It's really hard to get a thin shaving out of this. It's not too thin. Let's try to do it left-handed. Okay, pretty good. Let's do a few more. Poke that out with my fingers. Okay. Let's take a look at what we produced here. Is that focused? There it is. Focus, yeah. It looks pretty good. I got a pretty nice cut. It is not super smooth. That blade is definitely vibrating. It doesn't really have a lot of support, and it's a pretty thin blade. All right, let's try some harder wood. And we're going to try that. This is just some scrap wood. And you can see it does build up in there pretty quickly. Okay, the first thing I can tell you is I'm going the wrong direction on the grain for this mahogany. African mahogany has kind of crazy grain. So it's cutting okay. Again, not super smooth. See if this is set up well enough to bring it in the other direction. No, it's not really. So, all right, not the greatest example. Let's try something else. Okay, our last test with the Chinese one is going to be a piece of oak. All right, pat that down a little bit. There we go. All right, here's my hammer. Okay, that actually cuts the oak better than it cut the other woods. Let's take a look, see if we can see. Okay, not great, and I'm not getting my angle very flat. It's probably out of adjustment now that I've been messing with it, but it works. The back of the plane here is a little sharp. Probably could use a little rounding off. And I think that it's not supported very well, but I think a longer wedge might solve that a little bit. Get down here and hold the blade a little more, give it a little more backing. Because in the pine, especially, which is the softest wood, it really showed quite a bit of vibration. All right, let's set up and test the other one. Okay, the antique plane against a piece of fine pine with a vent setup on it. And you see the curls coming off of that are a little different. They're also about the same thickness. I don't seem to be very good at adjusting that for a fine cut. Okay, one thing I can tell you, it doesn't really eject much better than the Chinese one. That's interesting. But it is, now it also isn't glass smooth, but it's smoother. The blade is a lot thicker, and so it is sort of supported better just by that. And yeah, not great on that pine. Interesting. Okay, back a second. All right, African mahogany with the antique plane. Get the stuff out of it. All right, there we go. Oh, that feels good. Okay, those are pretty thick. Those are thicker than what I would normally want to make. Cutting just fine. Okay, now compared to the other plane also, even though it's not that much different, that difference in radius, this antique much more comfortable than this. This could be fixed though. That's just a sanding job. And finally, oak. Yeah, let's take a look at that. see what we produced. All right, that is not too bad. I need a little work on my technique. I can get a really good square shoulder, which I know is from setup. It cuts the oak pretty good. So if I was going to draw a conclusion between the two, I'll tell you, I kind of like the antique one better. First of all, it was a lot cheaper. It was only $10, whereas I paid about $25 for this. It's more comfortable in the hand. The blade, which is much thicker and also has more support from its wedge, but that I could probably make a wedge longer that would come down here and hold that blade a little better. So, you know, if you have the option, I really think this is a better plane. Even though the steel was, I think, a little softer. But if you don't have the option, if you don't have anything near you, if you don't want to order something off the internet because you don't know what you're going to get when you're buying an antique, you know, you're a pretty safe bet with this. I've also got some ideas to maybe modify this and do something else with it. I have to think on that a little bit. I need a drawer bottom plane, a grooving plane, and maybe I can cut this and modify it to make it a 1/4 inch wide grooving plane. I don't know. We'll see. That probably won't happen this week, but it's something that's in the back of my mind. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this and maybe learned a little something about the difference between an antique and sort of a modern version of it. And we'll catch you next time.